Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday to you. My name is Tim Harris. It's 10 o'clock. It's time for Tim with Tim. We are going verse by verse through the book of Romans. It is so good. It is just so good, and I'm glad that you're with me. We do this every day. If you're new, gosh, I'm so glad that you found us. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. Also Spotify if you just want the audio podcast. And it's not about me. It's not about, I'm not anybody smart. I'm just in the Word every day and inviting you to join me in the journey of just going verse by verse through the whole Bible. And we've been at this since 2020, and 2025 is the year that we will finish the Bible together. So there you go. If you ever wondered, I wonder how long it would take me to read the Bible if I did it for 10 minutes a day. Well, about 5 years, apparently, because that's what we've done. But Romans chapter 4 is where we are today. This is a really important chapter. I know that, I don't know, I don't mean to underestimate some of our desire to be in the Word or our willingness to read hard passages, but chapter 4 is, I guess for some people, it just kind of, it just kind of goes over their head, or that they don't really want to dig into it. But what Paul is doing here is breathtakingly brilliant and important in terms of the gospel, and helping us understand how the gospel, relates to the Old Testament, and how the plan of salvation, starts with Abraham and is completed in Jesus and somehow saves the whole world, even though only the Jews had the law. There's so many basic questions. And what about the Jews now? What about the Jews? And so Paul is, painstakingly, systematically approaching those hard questions. And in chapter 4, it's just great. Now, why are we going back to Abraham? We're going back to Abraham because he is, you can't call him the first Jew because Abraham wasn't technically Jewish, and besides, God didn't choose him because of his race. And that's what's very important. And that's most of what Paul is saying in chapter 4 here. Abraham wasn't chosen because of his Jewishness, because technically he wasn't Jewish. I guess because he was the first Jew. He's the father of father of the Jewish people, father of the children. The Jews are basically those who are the descendants of Abraham. And that's one way to talk about it. But that's not what Paul is saying in Romans chapter 4. And that's what's amazing. That's what's amazing. Paul is saying from a spiritual perspective, when God said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, he wasn't talking about a physical, DNA, genetic, racial kind of nation. He was talking about spiritual children. Abraham is going to be the spiritual father of nations. You understand? So the promise wasn't just simply that he would be the father of one great nation that would be Israel, and the Jews would be God's chosen people. Yes, that's part of the plan, but that wasn't the whole plan, And God's vision for Abraham, his promise to Abraham, was much greater than just you're going to father the Jewish people. You're going to have a new race. That's not what it says at all. So start with me. Verse 1. Abraham was, humanly speaking, the founder of our Jewish nation. What did he discover about being made right with God? All right, there you go, right there. That is the million-dollar question. That's the big question, and that's what chapter 4 is about. What did Abraham discover about being made right with God? Again, remember, it's righteous. The word is righteous. We don't have a verb form, but God righteoused Abraham. How did he do it? Well, if his good deeds had made him acceptable, verse 2, he'd have had something to boast about. But that was not God's way. That was not God's way, all right? For the scriptures tell us, very important verse, verse 3. It's quoting Genesis chapter 15. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. Abraham believed God. So see that. God chose Abraham, not because of his Jewishness or not because he could be the father of the Jews. God chose Abraham because of his faith. Because of his faith. All right? Very important. His faith. Now then he goes on. Verse 4. This will become important later when Paul's going to say the wages of sin is death. But in chapter 4, verse 4, he says when people work, their wages are not a gift, but something that they earn. But salvation, he says, is a gift. Nobody earns salvation by what they do. Plainly speaking, You can't earn righteousness because you're a sinner. Sinners can't earn righteousness. They are by definition unrighteous. They're sinners. Okay. So the only way righteousness is coming to me and you and Abraham and everybody else is it has going to have to be a gift. We can't earn it. We can't work for it. We can only receive it as a gift. David saw this. Again, I'm reminding you, Paul is able to preach the whole gospel and all he's got's the Old Testament, but he doesn't have any trouble doing it. Goes back to the book of Psalms, Psalm 32, I think, and uses these Psalms where David praises the grace of God and the forgiveness of his sins. In other words, I'm a crummy sinner, but God still accepts me because of his grace. He forgives me. What joy for those whose record the Lord has cleared. That's grace, and that's beautiful. Now, is this a blessing only for the Jews, or is it also for the uncircumcised Gentiles? All right, I remind you, the Jews are a very small sliver of the human race. Everybody else is a Gentile, and most of us are uncircumcised Gentiles. You know what I'm saying? So Paul's like, well, is this blessing of righteousness only for circumcised Jews? And anyway, so then Paul goes back, and he's just so good. So, well, just, think about it for a minute. I'm paraphrasing Paul here. Think about it. Did Abraham get accepted before or after he was circumcised? Now, he asked you the question, but he knows the answer. The answer is, well, he was received and made righteous before he was circumcised. So his circumcision was beside the point. And Paul's saying in so many words, it still is beside the point. It's got nothing to do with your salvation, nothing to do with God's willingness to accept you as righteous because of Jesus. Do you see that? Circumcision was a sign that Abraham already had faith and that God had already accepted and declared him to be righteous, even before he was circumcised. All right. So then Paul goes on. I'm in about verse 12. I don't mean to just read the whole chapter, but it's just so good. So Abraham is the spiritual father of those who have faith, but have not been circumcised. Who's that? Well, that would be, all of us. Everybody, the Gentiles, he's the spiritual father of everybody's got faith that hadn't been circumcised. He's also the spiritual father of those who have faith and are circumcised. Notice there, the common denominator, it's not circumcision, it's faith. It's faith. Abraham is also the spiritual father of those who have been circumcised, but only if they have the same kind of faith. You got that? So, when people say, Pastor Tim, are Jews going to heaven? That's an easy question. If they know Jesus, if they have faith, it's not going to be because they're Jews, not because they're born in Israel. None of that, y'all. They have to know Jesus. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus says you must be born again. You understand? It's just simple. It's the gospel. Clearly, God's promise to give the whole earth to Abraham and his descendants was not based on obedience to God's law, but on a right relationship with God that comes by faith. So the promise, verse 16, is received by faith. It is given as a free gift. I love it. I love it. Verse 16, Abraham is the father of all who believe. Abraham is the father of all who believe. So again, Paul is radically redefining what it means to, in some ways, to be Jewish. And through the book of Romans, you got to pay attention because he uses that word Jew or Jewish in several different ways. And you have to be able to follow his nuance. Here he is saying he's the father. Abraham is your father if you share his faith. You don't have to share his Jewishness, you have to share his faith. One of my favorite verses in all scripture here is this verse 17. Abraham believed in the God who brings the dead back to life and calls into existence the things that do not exist. I love that. Now, in Abraham's case, the things that do not exist, that would have been his offspring. Remember they were 100 years old, never had children. Sarah's already gone through the whole change. So the things that do not exist would include, her estrogen. She don't have any estrogen. He ain't got nothing. Abraham done lost that love and feeling, and he ain't got no Viagra either. I mean, there is no, kind of alternative, reproductive technologies in his day. These are all the things that do not exist. But think about your own life, the things that do not exist. Oh my goodness, a happy marriage maybe for some of you, or freedom from addiction, the things that do not exist, your children's salvation, your grandchildren's future, the things that do not exist. And God is the God who calls these things into existence. I love it. He just speaks out to the things that do not exist and calls the things that are not as if they are. I just love that. That's so good. Verse 20, Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. I'm never going to question the Bible. I'm never going to question Paul, but I'm just like, define never waver. Because I know we've read Abraham. Yeah, you can't fool with us now because we've been reading the Bible verse by verse, 10 minutes a day for 5 years. You can't mess with us anymore. We happen to remember that Abraham, I don't know if you say he wavered, but there was at least 2 times when he was at least a court low. The 2 times when he said that he lied and said Sarah was his sister. Or he was at least a court low when he brought in Hagar, and tried to have let Hagar be his baby mama. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying he wavered, but So if we're answering the question, what did Abraham discover about being made right with God? Here's what it is: weak faith will save you the same as strong faith. I agree. He never wavered. He just continued, moving forward with the Lord, but it was messy. Maybe he didn't waver, but, like I say, he had some days when he's at least a quart low. Can I say that? But strong faith, weak faith, it doesn't matter. Jesus said all you need is a smidge of faith, about the size of a mustard seed. Weak faith will save you, same as strong faith. So whether your faith is weak or strong today, you just put your faith in the God who brings the dead back to life and calls into existence the things that do not exist. And I promise you, you're going to be made righteous because of what Christ has done for you. Not because of what you've done, but because of what's done for you. It's all through Jesus. He was handed over to die because of our sins, and he was raised to life to make us right with God. That's the final verse, verse 25, and that is the gospel. I love it. I'm over time. Tomorrow, chapter 5, just verses 1 to 11, because they're amazing. Just 11 verses. Chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Read ahead. Get your pencil out. Memorize these verses. They're just so good for tomorrow. Romans chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Have a great Tuesday. It's a beautiful day. Get outside, y'all. Enjoy the sunshine. It's about to get cold up in Kentucky, and I'm counting days to spring. Love you guys so much.